Welcome back and good afternoon, ladies, gents and Pikachus, to another analysis and breakdown of the Quran of the Muslims. Yes, we are back once again, breaking it down verse by verse, breaking those verses down into factual, logical statements that we can read in English, so we can figure out what is Allah's intention, what is he trying to tell us, and more importantly, how does this affect our lives as non-believers in the world today. So before I start, as I do every day, I'm going to tell you now, if you have any doubts as to the things I'm about to read and tell you, please buy and read one of these from any good bookshop or from Amazon, and after reading it you'll figure out that every single word of my notes here that I'm about to tell you is 100% true to Allah's word in here and what Muslims believe today. So, if you've been catching up with the series, the last episode we went through some of the ways in which Allah describes women as plant pots for the seeding. Yes, they are grow bags full of fertiliser for you to plough your seed into, O men, but past that they don't have any value, and the kind of between the lines speculation that I made is because women aren't very good at killing Jews, so they don't have that much purpose apart from making men who can kill Jews, and the point is, in the Quran of the Muslims, that we need to get to our genocidal end times prophecy, where we behead all the Jews, Christians, atheists and pagans, and then we can have paradise and our 72 virgins. So that is what we're driving towards, and that is the only reason I feel women get a mention, because they are the baby machines. So with that in mind, let's carry on. Now before we get started, I'm going to give you a little disclaimer. These are going to be the rules on what happens to a divorced woman, and even though we have to go through it, otherwise we're not being complete, but there is nothing else in this episode apart from talking about divorced women, what happens to a divorced woman, and who pays off the dowry, who keeps the possessions. So I'm going to say straight up, it's not going to be one of those episodes where there's too much blood and gore. However, I feel it's important, if we care about women and equality, like everyone barks on about diversity and equality, if you actually care about women, you will watch this episode and you will not turn it off just because it's about women and not men. Alright? So, let's get started. 162. Divorced women should await 3 months if divorced and not hide any pregnancy. Otherwise, she has no faith in Allah and his end times prophecy and is sinful. Even so, her husband can decide she must come back to him if he wants her, and she has a similar right to request he stay, but he can tell her no, and the reason is Allah gives him a degree of power over her, for Allah is wise and powerful. So, let's break it down. Why is Allah starting off by saying, divorced women have to await for 3 months if divorced, and not hide any pregnancy? Well, I think it's clear, because Allah has said you can divorce your woman at any time for any reason. It's not like in the West where you have to have good reason to divorce and then a lawyer has to look it over. No, the woman has no rights in a Muslim marriage. I think that's clear. So what's happening here is when your husband boots you out the house, oh Muslim wife, that is what's causing your divorce. It's not because you are adulterous or you had what's it called when you have differences you can't solve? You have unsolvable differences. No. Your man just changed his mind about you and he wants to get married to someone else, so you're no longer in his favour, and when that happens, oh wife, and you get booted out on your backside, you have to wait 3 months before another man comes into your life, and during that 3 months, the reason you're having to wait that 3 months is to prove to your new husband that you do not carry another man's seed. Remember, you're a plant pot, you have to be selling yourself as an empty plant pot. If you have the tomatoes of another man in your pot, you are not worth a damn thing. That's what this is saying. Otherwise, they have no faith in Allah and his end times prophecy. So if you don't do this, O woman, you are actually considered to be a non-believer. You are sinful and not righteous, and Allah will not love you. And the fact is, if you don't believe in his end times prophecy, especially during Ramadan, off with your head, you're dead, although it will probably be stoning, because Allah is very merciful and he tends to just stone his women rather than cut off their heads. Even so, her husband can decide she must come back to him if he wants, and she has a similar right to request that he stay, though he has a degree of power over her, which Allah has given him because he is wise and powerful. So, what does this mean? Well, I think this one is fairly straightforward and doesn't need too much summary interpretation by moi. If he wants, her husband can decide after throwing her out and having her on the street as an orphan for a month or two, doing her penance for just not being in his favour. After starving on the street for a few months and being divorced, he can actually go, come back then, I changed my mind. You've cried enough and you've starved enough. Come back to the house. And she has to come back because she is property. She has a similar right to request that he leave the house or to stay if he has left. But he has the final vote on this because he has a degree of power over her. So I feel like the reason Allah is saying this is he's saying, woman, even though usually you don't have a right to complain or doubt or judge or moan about anything, you can't moan about anything usually. In this instance, you have one single right, and that is to complain about your husband after he throws you out on the road and beg for him to take you back. If he does want to take you back, he can, but it's not up to you, and the reason is because Allah has given your husband a degree of power over you. So you are his property. And the reason this degree of power is vetoed by the man, the reason why he has that power is because Allah is wise and powerful. And in his wisdom and power, he has decreed women don't get power in their own lives. They don't deserve that. So what it says, look, if you don't believe me, buy it and read it. I didn't say it, Allah did. Allah's book says this. If you don't believe me, buy it and read it. We'll carry on. 163. You are permitted once or twice only to divorce. After that, you will have to stay together or separated in friendship. You cannot take back the wedding rings or dowry, except when you need the money back and the man agrees. She can pay you for her freedom if the man doth agree, as long as you both do not break Allah's conditions, lest you are very, very wrong. So, short reading of this verse, I feel like once again this is unlike Sharia, like we went through, unlike the rest of the book, which is very, very easy to get wrong, or it's left open to interpretation, so Muslims can argue that it's not that bad. This, I feel, is not in any doubt. If you're a woman, you are not going to be arguing this, and the man is going to be making the decision based on his needs, whether or not you stay or leave, or whether or not you keep your wedding ring and your gifts and possessions or not. And as far as I can see here, it explicitly says, O woman, you cannot take back the wedding ring, any gifts or dowries, except when you need the money and the husband agrees. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, Allah, if you're kicking your wife out to the curb and she has no money and no ability to earn money and she has children, she's going to need that money. So there's no point saying if she needs the money, is there? She is 100% going to need that money. And the reason that this is said is to make sure that the man knows to say to the woman, you cannot take back your money, your wedding ring, your gifts, your clothes, or anything that I have bought you. You're out on your ear, love, with none of the children. They stay with the new wife that I have and one of my other wives. You're out on your own. You don't get to take your clothing, your stuff, and your wedding ring or any of the money that I gave you. No, you are now stricken from the family, effectively, and you are in exile. But it's up to me to say when you can come back. So you have to beg on the curb to me. Otherwise, you're just completely screwed. And then it rounds out the verse by saying, she can pay for her freedom if the man doth agree. So if the man takes pity on his poor, stricken, divorced wife outside in the rain, crying and starving, then and only then can she come back and pay for her freedom. See what he's saying there? So you can chuck her out and keep her in the state of being divorced, and she's not free. She's still your wife, but she's just in the state of divorce for 3 months. And the only way she can get out of that is if another man pays you and you agree. So another man can buy your stricken divorced wife off you and take her as his property. And obviously this doesn't count if she is currently pregnant to you, in which case her plant pot value is 0. No other man's going to do that. And this is okay in the eyes of Allah, as long as you keep Allah's conditions, which are not defined very well, but as we know, Allah's conditions are, if she is pregnant, she is not allowed to be divorced or leave, because first she has to have the baby, and then once her plant pot has, given the fruit of the plant pot, she is then allowed to be chucked out on the road, starving and crying, and be divorced. So I think at this midway point, I think we can see why these laws have been written here. This is not a law that makes them equal partners in marriage. This is not a law that empowers the woman. This is a law in the Quran of the Muslims, which directly empowers the man over the woman, and it even describes that it gives him a degree of power over her. And I feel the reason why Allah is doing this, even though he's claiming out, is because he's graceful and merciful. He is giving power to his man, so the man doesn't have to worry about his relationship or his children too much. He has all the time in the world to go and figure out the end times prophecy and how he's going to kill all those skanky evil Jews and Christians that he has to kill. That is what this is getting at. So despite the fact that the entire thing is written from the perspective of, oh, the woman does this, the woman does that, between the lines and in the actual descriptions, we can see that the woman is a artifact of possession, a law of equity, valuable piece of stuff that the man owns. And this is literally dictating to the woman who is now going to own her. Is it going to be the ex-husband? Well, if he wants her back and he is willing to forgive her, then yes. But if he is not willing to forgive her, then no. Unless another man wants to pay him. He doesn't have to pay her. He has to pay the ex. This is outrageous. Imagine this, right? Imagine I had an ex-girlfriend and I chucked her out. She's then not allowed to remarry or find another man unless I say it's okay. And even then, she has to give me back the wedding ring, give me back all the clothes and gifts that I give her, and the husband that she finds has to pay me a dowry before buying her new stuff. So it's extremely expensive to take a divorced woman on as another man, so it's pretty much not going to happen. And the reason is because Allah has given the man a degree of power over the woman so that he can say to her, well, you have to come back now and give me more babies. And the reason is because that is Allah's conditions, that we manufacture babies to go and kill the Jews with. That is what this means. Ah, it's terrible, isn't it? So let's carry on. 164. You cannot divorce your wife for a holiday, nor punishment, nor to put her in exile, O Muslim. She can pay her way to freedom. You cannot injure her, nor take undue advantage or do wrong to her. Oh, that's the end of it. So yeah, let's go through that again because my writing's terrible, ladies, gents and Pikachus. That's why I am having trouble reading it. If you divorce your wife for a holiday or punishment, O Muslim, or to exile her away, this is very bad. Now, it doesn't say there's any punishment for this. In fact, between the lines, I would say this is actually suggesting that you do that, but it's written in a way that Allah is not going to be blamed. So I would think this is probably a translator trying to pretty up the truth for any Western people who are reading the Quran of the Muslims in English, because it says you cannot divorce your wife for a holiday or for punishment, O Muslim, nor to exile her away. But then it goes on to say, if you try and during that period she marries another man, then you can take her back and there's no blame. So it's actually saying if that happens, even though you're not allowed to do those things, O Muslim, you're not allowed to divorce your wife just to throw her out on the curb. You're not allowed to divorce her so you can go on holiday with your bride, your other wife, or with the concubine. And you're not allowed to divorce her as a punishment to her for being naughty, or to send her away so that you can have time on your own. But if you do, there's no blame for you, O Muslim. She has to take the blame for that. And if she marries another man during that time and you want her back afterwards, he doesn't get to keep her. You get to keep her. She has to pay her way out of the other man's life and back into yours. Otherwise, she's extremely wrong and in sin. And we know how Allah feels about people who sin. Off your head, you're dead, you're in sin, burning in hell forever. And that brings us to our last verse. If you take a woman as your wife, but she carry the child of another, do not prevent her from paying her way to freedom if he wants her back. Such is the good favour of Allah to take her back to the old husband. So, breaking that down, wow, this is very interesting, isn't it? So if you find a wife, O Muslim, but it turns out she's actually already planted with someone, because she's a plant pot. If you find a new plant pot on the street and it turns out after a month or two she's actually pregnant, she's got a seed in there already, then you cannot prevent her from paying her way out of the marriage with you, because she then has to go back to the other man. But if she cannot afford to pay you for her freedom and the other husband doesn't want to pay her for her freedom, she is then a terrible sinner and will be punished. Such is the favour of Allah. So this is a favour to the woman. Literally, she is now trapped in a marriage with another man's baby in her belly. So that husband's going to be horrible to her and probably mistreat her. But unless she can afford to pay that husband to leave, her other husband still owns her and the child, but she's then stuck between two men, and that makes her a terrible sinner. And what I would say is, even though it's not expressly defined here yet, the operative word is yet, because it will be in the next episode, that woman who is in sin now is going to be extremely encouraged to pop herself off by killing herself. But we'll get to that in the next episode. So that's the end of the verse and the end of our reading. I feel like a short episode today. We don't need to go through this in great detail in summary. And the reason is it's very clear what Allah is saying in these rules. He is saying, "O woman, stay with your man if you can. Try not to do anything wrong or get on his bad side, because he has a degree of power over you. And if you upset him in any way and he kicks you out for any reason at all or no reason, you have to then wait for 3 months on the side of the curb as an orphan, and he doesn't have to pay you or give you food, even though he has your children and he has other wives that will look after him. You don't have other husbands to look after you." So Allah is saying in his wisdom and power, "O woman, you are property of the man, and that is the reason he can have 10 wives but you can only have 1 husband. And if your one husband throws you out on the road, you don't own any of your stuff apart from the clothes you are stood in." It doesn't even say that. I'm just assuming that you can take your clothes with you when you get chucked out. So really, to the letter of the law, when you boot out your wife for arguing with you or back-chatting or something, you can tell her to strip down, give you back the clothes you bought for her, and she can put back on the clothes that she was wearing when she arrived that don't fit anymore. And then you kick her out on the street. She has no money and no food and has to beg for your forgiveness, O Muslim. And Allah gives you a degree of power over her. So she's like the older child. That's her level in the family. She's like the older child. If you don't like her, you can kick her out, tell her she's wrong. Allah won't protect her. And she's only permitted 2 divorces, whereas you have an unlimited amount of marriages and divorces, O Muslim. She's only allowed 2. So that means if she's married to someone and he dies in battle, and then her brother marries her, you know, the dead guy's brother marries her, then he dies in battle, that's it. She's now an orphan by the law for the rest of her life and will probably end up killing herself or, you know, being a concubine. Even though it doesn't say that, we know from our previous readings of verses that that is what will likely happen. And what we're going to find out in the next episode is how that is described, of her bumping herself off, being removed from the problem, or removing herself from the problem. And then the final bit says, if you take a woman as your wife, but it turns out she is already planted with the seed of another, then you own her, and she has to pay her way out of your marriage to her, despite the fact that if she can't, her other husband will then punish her. And that's in the law. And that's Allah's wisdom and grace for her to be treated in this way. And that is the end of this video. So, I feel like this is a precursor to the more interesting one we're going to do tomorrow, which is about how a woman should kill herself or be suicided if she gets into stress and problems as described here, and being sinful between 2 husbands, or in just any other reason why the man in his degree of power over her decides that she is no longer good enough to be a wife. So look out for that tomorrow. Hope you enjoyed this and you learned something. In the meantime, I'm going to bid you good night. God bless, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye now. Who'd be a Muslim bride, eh? Sounds pretty terrible to me, but what do I know? I'm just a biased white Western man who knows nothing about the Islamic culture. So anyway, if you want to be with me and learn more, catch up with me tomorrow at 7:15. Until then, have a good night, God bless, and I will see you in the next one.